Well, welcome to Shop Time with Ravenheart Renditions. We're talking with Marc Spagnuolo, the Wood Whisperer, and we're going to ask him a few questions about spray finishing. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Oh, pretty good.
Good.
I recently acquired a an Urlex sprayer, a secondhand Urlex sprayer, and it's the I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's the black, really nice model of it.
Oh, I think it's the 5500 or
Yes,
is something like that.
something like that. I think you're
Hmm.
right. And I am the most I've done with spray finishing is I did some just spray can spar varnish on some outdoor stuff and a little bit of spray can shellac and a little bit of spray can polyurethane on a couple small projects.
Hmm.
And considering I have a decent sprayer system now and I picked it up pretty cheap, I'm wondering first, how do you get started doing this? I mean, what do what should you try to spray first, and what should you try to stay away from first? The project wise, and how do you get started?
Okay. Well, before I answer that, I do want to just sort of preempt this by saying I am not by any means a finishing expert or certainly not an HVLP expert. I just kind of know what I know from my own experience and love to share that information with people. So if you're really, folks are interested in getting a little bit more deeper into the spraying topic, I can give you some links and resources where they can go to folks who certainly have like oodles of experience in this stuff. But I am more than happy to help out and answer questions like this. Um, how do you get started? Well, I think the easiest way for the average person to get started is to go with what you did, a turbine system. And by the way, that's the Erlex 6900. The 5500 is the new modified blue and gray one. It's like the new version of the 5000.
Oh
The one
yeah.
you have is a little more powerful.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's actually a really good unit. I think that's probably my first recommendation is that people get a turbine system. If they're not familiar with what that is, it's sort of a self-contained everything you need to spray in one system. So you've got something that works. It's pretty much like a vacuum cleaner on reverse. It just blows air out into a hose, and it comes with a gun and a cup. And the system is all just sort of self-contained. The harder way to go, but maybe you might wind up with better equipment or more choices. Let's say, is to go with a compressor-based system in which case you would need a different type of gun. And like, this setup is just a little bit more complicated. So I think when you're first starting out, these turbine systems are fairly inexpensive. You could find them used. You could even go to Rockler. I think they have one of their cheapo units there for like 99 bucks. Now, granted, it's not like the absolute best spray system out there, but for 99 bucks, you can get your feet wet, you can get your project sprayed, and you could start to understand what the world of HVLP is all about. So equipment wise, that's probably what I'd recommend is go for a turbine. It's just the ultimate in simplicity. You just buy one package and get everything you need.
Hmm.
But as far as finishes go, a lot of times I recommend finishes that dry fast. Now, you mentioned using like an aerosol can of yeah, spar varnish, and it's not a bad way to go. But I really try to avoid things like oil-based finishes because they dry over a long period of time. So if a finish dries fast, it really just lends itself well to having success with HVLP. Because what you're trying to do is atomize this finish and spray it over a large surface very quickly. And especially if you're doing a vertical surface, if you use something like an oil-based finish, you have a lot more potential for drips and sags. So there's a lot more pressure on you to make sure you don't have these things appearing in the final finish. Something like a water-based finish or a lacquer is much more friendly to spraying, and you wind up being able to see your results very quickly. Vertical surfaces dry fairly quickly. You could still get drips and runs, but I think it's a lot. Those types of fast evaporative and solvent-based finishes are much faster drying, and you don't have as much occurrence of those drips and things like that. So that's where I usually recommend people go. These days, I mean, if you're in California, you really can't even get these things like lacquer anymore, so you have to kind of go water-based, whether you want to or not. You don't really have much choice in the matter, but the water-based finishes are getting better over time, and they're looking more and more like lacquers and oils. So we can't we still have a ways to go, but it's definitely getting better.
Yeah, cool. Well, speaking of the guns and the systems, now there's a few things I've seen out there that sell like I guess they call it a cup insert. It's kind of the a thing that goes inside of the paint cup, so it
Hmm.
makes it so you can switch that out, and supposedly it makes cleaning easier. Have you ever
Yeah.
used something like that, or?
I haven't. I sort of went a little bit more of a utilitarian way, and I just got more than one gun, or more than one cup, I should say. Because then if you do that, that's not a bad idea. It's just something that I haven't really gotten into using the inserts. But the concept is sound because whenever you get certain types of finishes in that gun, sometimes it can become difficult to clean it, and if you have residue from one finish, you don't want that to contaminate the next finish. So if you're switching back and forth from, let's say an oil-based system to you switch over to water-based, you not only have, the gun components and the needle and the cap and things like that that are going to get the finish on it, but of course that cup. And if you at least have the cup sort of isolated with that inner liner, that sounds like a pretty good way to go. But then that's just one more thing that you have to buy a pack of, and a disposable product, kind of like filters for your shop vac and just
Yeah.
all the little things that add up over time, right? So for me, I'd rather spend a few extra bucks, get an extra cup. I write on the outside H2O. I get one. I write on the outside, lacquer and shellac, and I kind of keep those separated from one another so that I don't have to worry about it too much. And then cleanup just becomes a breeze because water-based stuff, you just clean up with some water and maybe even a little bit of warm soapy water run through the system. And your lacquers, you would clean up with your lacquer thinner, and shellac clean up with alcohol.
Oh, cool. Well, and speaking of that, is there finishes that you would say to stay away from it all? I guess I've heard people kind of worry about spraying shellac, and I've heard people worry about some of the other things. Is there a reason to worry about any of them?
Well, for the one thing I mentioned before was the oil-based finishes. That's just more, I think it's a challenging thing to deal with. But there's also, of course, a safety concern. Before anybody gets into spraying, you have to think about the environment you're going to spray these things in. So if you are spraying something that's flammable, well, you better not be spraying that near, a pilot flame in your garage or something like that. Once that stuff is airborne, you could potentially have a hazard there. So that's definitely something. I don't know if that's where your question was going towards safety or not.
Yeah, I guess the
Okay.
environment wise, I mean, you're right. If you end up spraying something that is oil based, I obviously wouldn't want to do that in the basement area here at all because I'd basically make a small, well, actually a pretty large bomb out of my house.
Right. Yeah, well, there goes his house. Yeah,
Yeah.
that wouldn't be a good thing. Yeah, you have to really think about your setup there, and if you can at all, it's absolutely advisable to make yourself a little sort of spray booth or even a makeshift spray booth where I've seen a number of different versions of where they take big panels of foam and essentially make a three-sided collapsible. It's almost like a lean-to in a way, and then you just put a box fan in a hole and spray right in front of that box fan. Put a filter in front of it, and then you could spray all day long like that, and it'll pull a lot. Not all of it. It's not the best way to do it, but it gets the job done. It'll take a lot of that overspray, and basically you could put that right on your front garage door if you're working in a garage environment, and it'll pull all that overspray out. The thing is, you have to be careful with the fans. Obviously, a regular box fan is not explosion proof. So if you have a flammable finish, excuse me, like your lacquers, even your oil-based finishes, you won't be able to use that system. You can only use water-based
Hmm.
on something like a standard box fan. Now, if you upgrade to something that is explosion-proof, then you can get away with spraying your lacquers and the things that are flammable. So that's certainly something to consider. I would never spray indoors without like extreme ventilation. And by extreme, I mean like a big fan moving air. So you have a sort of fresh air intake on one side of the room and a way of exhausting it through the other side. Generally, that overspray just goes everywhere. It creates a cloud. It's going to get on your tools. It's going to get into your HVAC system of your house if you're attached to your house. So I would avoid it at all costs if you can. But if you have to spray inside, you want like really, really good ventilation. But generally, because I don't really have any of that stuff right now, and I don't want to spray in my shop, I just spray in the driveway. And it's not ideal, but again, that's why I like those fast drying finishes because they dry really quickly and tend to dry a little bit. They dry before bugs have a chance to come and say, "Hey, what's going on down there?" And they get, "Oh crap, I'm stuck." That, and of course dust is always an issue. So the faster the finish dries, by the time it sort of starts to solidify and I could see it skinning, I could take the piece and bring it back into the shop for the remainder of the drying period, and that tends to be the safest way to go. And I could spray just about anything I want to that way.
Yeah, cool. Um, Now you touched on horizontal and vertical surfaces. What about spraying on the inside of stuff? Is it, I guess, in your opinion, better to do some of that pre-assembly, or or is it not a problem spraying on the inside of like a cabinet or something like that?
Yeah, it's always a problem spraying on the inside of a cabinet. You just have your three surfaces, especially as you approach that corner, that are all meeting in one place. There's just no great way to get that. I mean, there is sort of a systematic approach in attacking one plane at a time, and you can sort of gauge the order in which you attack those planes to get the least amount of overspray and bounce back. Problem is, though, you're spraying inside the case, it's always going to be problematic. So if there's any way that you could finish the inside of that case ahead of time, and then somehow mask it off or be very careful about the direction of your overspray when the piece is assembled so that you don't spray the outside and wind up ruining the finish on the inside in the process, that would really be an awesome way to go. The problem is a lot of times that's either unrealistic or maybe too much work because you're taping off joints left and right, or in a cabinet assembly, the piece that goes into your dado, even if you mask your dado, the little part that goes into your dado or groove probably shouldn't have finish on it either. So you would
Hmm.
have to completely mask off all your joints to really get the best possible glue bond there that you can. So sometimes it doesn't work out, but yes, if you can save yourself the headache, because the inside of cases can be a real pain in the butt. Aside from the strategic approach of sort of tackling the different planes one at a time, a lot of times I tend to spray a slightly thinner finish on the inside of the case, and I think that's kind of my training wheels, if you will. I think someone
Sure.
who's really experienced can just knock it out with no problem, but I like a little bit of a thinner finish because it just seems like it gives me a little bit more working time, and I can also play a little bit more inside without packing on layers of finish if I need to kind of redo an area, respray an area that got a little bit too much of the bounce back on it.
Yeah, cool. I was just thinking maybe a little thinner might work on the inside, but yeah, that worked great.
Hmm.
Well, I guess those are the questions that I had that I'm sitting there looking at the sprayer thing the other day going, you know what? I think I need a few questions answered before I'm going to attempt this the first time. And I have a couple of projects that are coming up that I'm going to be hopefully using it on the out in my driveway on this too. And I have the luxury of having a nice little gravel area next to my driveway that if I end up spraying onto that, well, then I just kill the weeds that shouldn't be growing there anyway.
Okay. So yeah, you were mentioning spraying outside. That's one thing that I haven't really read about in books. When I read on resources like this, because most things are assuming the best environmentally. They're assuming that you have a spray booth or you have one of these makeshift lean-tos with a fan in it, and the truth is most of us don't. So I've become quite good at just spraying in a non-ideal environment. So some of the things that I do to kind of get around that: number one, use those fast drying finishes. Number two, I mentioned it previously as well, is once the finish seems like it's skinned over, like it's not, might be dried to the touch, but not completely cured, I then take it into the shop and let it finish curing there, where there's a lot less dust and things to worry about. I also do a heck of a lot of sanding. That is one disadvantage to the system, is because there's more dust, you can't just keep layering finish on top of a gritty surface because it's just going to compound your problem. So I keep plenty of wet dry sandpaper, 600 grit and higher. I use a lot of the Festool's Platine abrasive pads. I don't even use them on a sander. I use those by hand. And that helps me get a nice smooth surface. And then by the time I'm at my final coat, if I'm using something like shellac or lacquer, I tend to go with a fairly thin coat. And those thin coats, because there's not as much finish in it, they tend to cure a little bit quicker. So I can get that thin finish on there. Hopefully, it will leave me with a nice smooth surface. And if not, then I just do a little bit of post, abrasion to the surface using really, really high grits, like 2000 grit, just to smooth everything out for the final finish. But sometimes when we've got to spray in those non-ideal conditions, you got to think outside the box and maybe do a little bit more work to make sure that everything comes out right.
Yeah, that sounds great. It actually all good advice and everything sounds good to me. Not quite as scared to give it a shot now. So
Well, you know what? When you do it, get yourself some cardboard or some scrap plywood that you don't care about. put water in the gun. Granted, water is certainly thinner than most of the stuff you're going to spray, but it'll give you an idea of what it feels like to do this. You can spray as much water as you want, right? I mean, all
Yeah.
day long. It's not going to hurt anything, and it isn't costing a lot of money. Get used to how the system works, adjust the flow of the liquid, adjust the air pressure, adjust your fan shape and size. Just get a feel for what it's like to cover the surface. And, those over, generally with spraying, you want to sort of have those overlapping strokes. So each pass, you want to cover the previous pass by at least 50% when you do it. And you also want to make sure that you start the spray just a couple inches off the workpiece so that it's in full spray mode by the time you touch the workpiece. You also want to make sure that you kind of see yourself as having sort of a robot arm. You want to make sure that you aren't spraying in an arc. You want to spray with the nozzle an equal distance from the surface the entire way. So these things are all body, maneuvers that you have to get used to. So why not do that with water and a piece of cardboard rather than your actual workpiece, which is likely to be a little bit tricky on your first shot. So the good thing is you got plenty of water. You can go out there and just practice until you feel a little bit more comfortable with it with the gun. And then by the time you put finish in there, you should feel quite a bit more comfortable with the process.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks. That's a good idea.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, hey, I know you've got a little one to take care of, and I somehow picked up this running habit now, so I'm gonna go and attempt that again.
Run exercise. What is that?
Well, I don't want to put the weight back on. I got it off,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I'll tell you, that is one thing the little one has completely taken off my menu of things to do every day. It's like, why is it that like personal health is the last thing to go back on the list after you have a kid? It's
Yeah,
like eat right and exercise. Sure, sure, when I have time.
yeah, maybe when they're 18, right?
Right, exactly. Yep.
Well, hey, Mark, I want to say thanks and thanks for all the advice, and I'll let you know how this stuff turns out.
Hey, sounds great. I'm looking forward to seeing your many sprayed finished products.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
All right, yep, take care.